Hello and welcome to the Fellowship Phase, an Adventures in Middle-earth podcast. I'm Josh and that's Callum, and that is Brendan. We're going to give you inside information on how to find your own path through Tolkien's world.
The sun, a pale and watery yellow, was gleaming through the mist just above the west wall of the hollow in which they lay. North, south and east, beyond the wall, the fog was thick, cold and white. The air was silent, heavy and chill. Even as they looked out in dismay towards the setting sun, it sank before their eyes into a white sea, and a cold grey shadow sprung up in the east behind. The fog rolled up to the walls and rose above them, and as it mounted, it bent over their heads until it became a roof. They were shut in a hall of mist, whose central pillar was the standing stone.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome, Brendan. Hello, Callum.
It's nice to be back, unless, depending on the order you're putting these episodes out, it's nice to be here for the first time.
Yes. When are the episodes going out, or how are they going out, or why are they going out, or who are they going out? Nobody knows.
I certainly don't know. But it's nice to be here.
It is, and it's particularly when the weather is so nice today.
And I know that you're segueing into the episode, but the weather actually is very nice. So it's
It is, yeah.
Actually not nice where I am, it was a lie. It was really sunny this morning, and then I went to work and I sat inside a windowless room all day, and I was looking forward all day to going outside in the sun. And then I ran into some people as I was about to go outside, and I was like, oh, I'm really looking forward to going to the sun. And they just looked very sad for me. It's always sunny in Dunbar, so.
It is always sunny in Philadelphia, and it's never sunny in Barovia. I have actually been unwell, so I have been looking at the good weather out my window, like Robert Louis Stevenson looking out his window, be more creative. That's how I've justified to myself sitting inside and not doing anything. I didn't write a novel, though. I just play video games.
And how is the weather in the wilds, Brendan?
In the wilds, the weather is very nice. Yeah. There's actually only one cloud in the sky, which is a bit unusual. And that cloud doesn't fill the whole sky. So that's also nice.
Is it a cloud, or is it Crowbane from Dunbar?
Well, it is moving fast and against the wind. So I'll let you know as the situation develops.
So why are we talking about the weather? Because we're British. But really, why are we talking about the weather?
Well, we're talking about the weather because we're going to use this opportunity to talk about how weather and terrain can make your combat more interesting in Adventures in Middle-earth.
Yeah, and by the end, hopefully you'll know whether you agree with us on this or not.
That was a truly awful pun. I don't even know if I want to stay here for the rest of this.
Let's just power through, Brendan. Sometimes I have to just let them wash over me. We're going to talk about terrain and talk about weather. Now, we've talked on and off about what makes combat in AIM great. And we've touched on some of this before, but I think there are a lot of lessons for lore masters in particular of how you can add extra dimensions into combat with either your maps or, if you do theatre of the mind, in the way you articulate the terrain, particularly whether that has any mechanical effect on the battle, and also things like weather conditions, which come into play sometimes during a journey and also during combat. And this is, I think, a good way to differentiate between different battles, even if you might be fighting the same type of enemies, or indeed, if you actually are fighting literally the same enemies, perhaps in some kind of sequel battle, you can mix it up with some terrain or with some weather. So let's talk about terrain first. You two have both run Adventures in Middle-earth and have used terrain in your battles to good effect. So what kinds of things could people be thinking about as terrain that they would use in a battle?
Well, I suppose that the first thing that kind of comes to mind is that in any given kind of terrain situation, there are going to be things which give one side or the other an advantage. I suppose, thinking about kind of what the objectives are for each side, but that a kind of a narrow terrain like a gorge or something is going to be more advantageous for people who want to kind of stand firm and maybe kind of make a defensive line. So often that's quite good for a party, I feel, kind of having a defensive position on the terrain that you give people.
It can really give people hope where there is none. Like if it feels like an overwhelming situation, and then you give people like a strong, feel like they can make decisions, narrative choices that give them advantages. That's what you want to do in games. And maybe in D&D you do that by, having a spell or using that to give yourself some advantage. You change the terrain and you modify it. Whereas in this low magic setting, there's very few ways in which you can like heavily influence the world around you very quickly. So putting those in front of people becomes much more important, I think.
Can I draw an example from a game that you ran, Callum? And it was a relatively early one. And basically, we were traveling through the wilds and we were being stalked by a pack of wargs. And they kept getting closer and closer and closer. And it was really tense because we knew that there were many more wargs than us. And they were potentially quite dangerous. But basically, that we'd kind of, maybe this was very subtle lore mastering from Callum, and we're being steered in that direction. We made for this kind of rocky outcrop, so that we could get this kind of narrow, it was kind of a ravine that we could go down, and that we could have some kind of defense against this mass number of wargs. And it suddenly made, I don't think we felt hopeful, but it turned a situation where that kind of that sense of dread and was getting quite big, and our chances of success felt very, very low, into feeling like it was something that we could manage.
I think that's a big theme of Tolkien's work, isn't it? Like over and over again, it's situations that feel hopeless, and then hope is rekindled through one way or the other, and replicating that can be really useful. I love doing that when I'm designing a journey, which is the core of the game, really, is like thinking about routes and giving people options. Like, well, you can go, I think there was one recently, you were going up the Western Anduin Vales, and I don't even remember this one, Josh, and you could either go like, there's like a forested route, or you could follow the river. And yes, as I was doing it, I was thinking it like, I had battle maps prepared for both, and I was thinking, I guess when you're describing things, particularly if people are like wanderers and they've got these skills, these people that would really know the wilds, kind of laying out like what the potential advantages and disadvantages, like, well, you might be easier to find your way this way, you might be better hidden, but there it might be more defensive, and then translating that into combat. So like, and I guess the terrain we're talking about it specifically in the context of combat, but it has such a big impact in so many parts of the game. And it's so evocatively shot in the places around New Zealand, some of which I've been able to visit, and it's just been like, wow. These sort of, the barren, rocky plains of Rohan, or the Anduin River, and all these sort of, I think not only does it make combat more interesting and make journeys more interesting, but it is a big part of how you're sort of bringing people into that world and selling it, I guess.
I think that kind of setup that you outlined there for combat, where every journey choice has got a trade-off in it, and I think that there's something quite interesting about that as it applies to combat. And I'm thinking of another scenario that you did, that we were out to the east of Mirkwood, and we were on a kind of a very far, actually, we were really near to the Selder and the river running, in the middle of these kind of the grass, open plains. And we were being tracked by a party of mounted soldiers. And basically the choice really kind of came down to, do we try and make it back to Mirkwood and try and fight them in the eaves of Mirkwood, face them in the eaves of Mirkwood, where their cavalry is not going to have such a strong advantage over us? even though that doing that journey and trying to beat them there, we're going to be risking exhaustion? Or do we stick where we are? We know that we're not going to be exhausted. We're going to be in a better shape maybe to do the fight, but the terrain is really going to be against us. So I thought that was a really, really interesting kind of, neither was a great choice.
Yeah.
And that made it really tense.
That's what makes a good board game. And I think it applies in RPGs, is making people have to make interesting choices, but weighing up the risks and benefits. And you see that a lot in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, where a lot of the decisions come down to decisions between bad thing, and often those are the terrain, like this really snowy pass or this very dangerous cave, or coming out of the East Gate of Moria, and they're making it very clear that we have to press on because we can't fight goblins out here. We need to get to the safety of the forest. Being on the river and that being, so all these sort of decisions are really important. So yeah, I think that's the why of it.
Yeah, and I think some examples, and the gorge one is a good one, because one thing I like about terrain is that it can give one side a significant advantage, which is fun, because when battles are a little unbalanced for one reason or another, it can change the odds. What I also really like is that because it can give one side an advantage, it can let a low-level party fight potentially much more dangerous enemies than they normally would. So, for instance, our party fighting a large group of wargs in the open, we couldn't, and it wouldn't have been a realistic encounter. Whereas we got to feel very heroic and exciting because we got to fight a lot of them, but actually with the advantage of the terrain, it was more balanced. And I actually think the flip side, the same kind of terrain, much, much later on, we'd left Mount Gundabad and we were heading to Rivendell, and we were a much stronger party at this point. And we had to go through a gorge, and we had similar narrative decisions of whether we do it during the daytime, whether we do it at nighttime, whether we'd sneak or not. And we were ambushed by goblins in the gorge. Now, at the level we were at, we just fought loads of orcs, and we had magic items. We were quite powerful. Fighting goblins was not particularly challenging. However, because the way you'd set up the terrain, it was a very narrow, very steep gorge. They were high up. They had rocks. They had cover. They were firing down on us. And we were really torn because our objective wasn't just to kill them all. It was to get through this gorge. We were really torn about whether or not we should stand and fight. That made it really challenging for us, I think, in deciding what to do. We ended up trying to run through the chasm. And actually, Halmir, who had an AC of 21, actually was knocked unconscious by goblins firing arrows down on him. And you managed to take what should have been quite a straightforward encounter into really quite an exciting one. And it was because of the terrain. We couldn't get to them easily. Yeah. You were forcing us to make different choices. So yeah, I think it's a good example of being able to make things unbalanced in a way that gives you a bit of fun to play with.
I was so glad you did that, because I'd set up this whole narrative, and there was a choice. You could have gone to the west and around Mount Graham, and really into Angmar, but it would have added a lot of time into your journey. You would have had different dangers. You were being stalked by some sort of strange spirit type figure, and then right at the end of that, there was a whole bit where you crossed over a river, and then a load of rangers kind of popped out and helped you, and they used the terrain to their advantage.
Yes.
So yeah, that's a good example of where the enemies made it. It was much more challenging because of the terrain.
Can we talk about then the mechanics of terrain actually in a battlefield? Because there are some mechanics already baked into the rules. The one I'm thinking of is cover, which is a fairly straightforward mechanic, which is it offers you an AC boost if you're in different degrees of cover. And that applies both to you as player characters and also to monsters that you're fighting. So that feels like the kind of the baseline example of terrain rules, which is you make sure that the terrain, the map, has features that can allow people to take cover. Maybe it's a wall or a hedge or some rocks, or you can become more and more complicated if you're fighting in some kind of a castle or a ravine. There are other examples of terrain has mechanical rules, or times that we've used rules with the players to say, if you want to tackle this piece of terrain, it's going to require you to do X, Y, Z.
Yeah, so in the Lore Master's Guide, they lay out a whole lot of different settings and the type of terrain you might meet and some proposed mechanics for how that would work. So to give some example of things that you fought in, so bogs are a good one. So they have difficult terrain, so you get half movement. And I think difficult terrain feels like quite a small thing, but then you look at things like was it Entangle in D&D, actually they can have a real impact if you're moving at half speed and maybe the enemies aren't, maybe nimble or goblins that are running across, or that they've got some way of mitigating that can make a fight really hard. Other things are like cliffs. So in this, I actually don't think I've ever used this. They suggest that if you're climbing a cliff, then it takes an entire movement action to climb 10 feet of height, and climbers have a -2 to AC when suffering a ranged attack. So making it interesting. And also, if you're at the top of a cliff, you can use a shove action to push someone off it. Which I think you don't need that written down, but we've done it.
Yeah,
that's right.
Halmir's done that before. He's used the shove action to push someone. It wasn't actually off a cliff. It was a kind of sloping hill, and he was involved in a brawl at the top, and he actually pushed someone down the hill because he was kind of ganged up on. But that again was a fun way of adding the terrain to give the players more options. Climbing is always an interesting one because taking the high ground is obviously very important. Getting to high ground can often then be a challenge, and I think a good lore master makes it a challenge. You give the option that, okay, there is good cover up there, and with that high ground you'll have a good view of the battlefield, but the cliff or the rocky outcrop, whatever it is big enough that you're going to need to use your action to get up there. And again, you're giving the players a choice. You can use your action to climb it, in which case you're not getting to attack or do something else, but if you do, you then have the advantages of more cover, potentially better range. Maybe there's an objective that you're looking to reach, which is up on the cliff. So I think it's, again, another way of putting choices in front of the players.
Yeah. There's a couple of other little things that I actually read every time we talk about something and we read it again. I'm like, oh, this is giving me an idea. So thick mud, you get -1 to attack rolls if you're fighting in thick mud. It's quite cool. If you're on a slope, then if you're higher up on the slope, you get advantage. People lower down get disadvantage if it's
I think we have used that one before.
Yeah, we've definitely used that. Bracken, that's difficult. It's just difficult terrain. No, thicket. Sorry, I'm getting confused between bracket and thicket. How could I? Thicket, close growing strands of trees. Range attack through a thicket are made at disadvantage, even at close range, and you can't make long range attacks. So like bringing in the mechanics of the different ranges and weapons, which can...
That's interesting. There's not many interactions between those two things.
No, it's normally just disadvantage.
And then there's some of the ones that, like in Mirkwood specifically, they've got things like poisonous fumes from different mushrooms. And when we were in Gundabad, I loved I found stuff in one of the ice modules for Gundabad, which is like an older, was it from the 80s role-playing game? And they had this whole table of different mushrooms. And every time you were going through it, I was like, roll a dice, and then it'd be like really vivid description of mushrooms. And then you'd all be like, we're going to ignore it. And I'm like, no!
The whole thing wouldn't have been so much of an issue if there wasn't a member of our party who was desperate to collect all of the mushrooms they could find.
Yeah, they were quite dangerous mushrooms.
Asking for trouble. Who picks a mushroom in a goblin cave, eh?
Oh, you got to push the big red button, or the big red mushroom.
There's something that I was going to say, that I think that one of the things mechanically, one of the strongest mechanics that we found, I'm sure you guys have talked to us about this before, in the game in combat, is the flanking mechanic.
Yep.
Where you've got people on both sides of someone, and so they both get advantage on combat against that person. So that is really, really powerful, and the ability to get that or to deny that is really, really important, and can really, really swing combat. So I suppose just thinking about the way that plays into how open or not battlefield is, so that you can kind of as a lore master, you can control how often that scenario is liable to come up by, if you make a relatively closed, either, it's something like a ravine or there's lots of different terrain elements in it, you're going to make flanking much harder. Whereas if you've got a much more open field, then you're going to be in the opposite situation.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that, and that is something we're talking a lot about how as a lore master, because the lore master is the one who will choose the maps and generally will be the one who kind of spawns the combats and the encounters. We've talked a lot about how when you're running the game you can use terrain, but players use terrain as well. And I actually think if you lore master well, it encourages players to look for opportunities to use terrain. And that's when they really are having fun. And an example, talking of flanking there, Brendan, when we were in Gundabad, Callum, you did a good job of describing how narrow some of the passages were and also how populated it was with orcs. Often we were dodging between patrols or we felt we were being chased. And because you had established running the game that there were mechanical benefits and disadvantages to things like flanking or cover, we were always looking for those opportunities. I remember a time when we knew we were being chased and we were like, we cannot outrun them. We're going to have to stand and fight. But because you'd really made it very clear throughout that there was terrain and described it, we were like, right, what we can do is we'll find a choke point and we'll position ourselves so that we will guarantee ourselves get flanking, but only one of them can get through. And we positioned archers in such a way that they were in cover. And it made the encounter, we almost designed the encounter ourselves as players, because we were like, we want to look for an opportunity to flank. We don't want to get flanked. We want to have cover. And that made it really fun.
We also had your giant shields. We had two giant shields, and we're like, these need to be front and center. We want to make sure that it's the shields taking the hits, no one else.
And it was great fun because it meant, again, we fought some orcs, which is in Adventures in Middle-earth, a pretty common type of combat. But that particular encounter felt completely unique because of the terrain. That was the thing that was different to the previous times we'd done it.
I love that. The whole stuff around like flanking as a rule, we've talked about this quite a few times because it's an optional extra rule that's very powerful, and we've ended up just leaving it as advantage. There's just various debates on Reddit about, do you have it? Do you not? Do you just modify it? And one of my slight quibbles with the rules for terrain is that a lot of things end up giving you advantage or disadvantage, and it very quickly gets sort of negated out and no longer relevant. So because you can get it with flanking quite easily, does that undermine other things that give you advantage or disadvantage? I'm not sure, and I think it is fine. But I guess the key thing is that, there are suggested mechanics in Lore Master's book if you're lucky enough to have it, and they are good inspiration. But I would say the majority of time it's sort of just either you can just use rules like difficult terrain, the cover mechanics, and common sense. There's also like people are just like, so say there's some rules for like unstable walls, and saying that like if there's an unstable wall, you can push it onto someone else and then they take 2d then bludgeoning damage if they fail dex save. And I love that they're like suggesting those things because it can be a good inspiration, but I don't think you necessarily need to stick to the rules. And certainly do that a lot. Like, you're in a situation, maybe there's a tree that's standing there that's like, looks like, if you describe the terrain well, then players will come up with interesting ideas of what to do. Like, I can push something off that, or, I could push that onto them, or maybe if I climb this tree, then I'll get some sort of advantage. And I generally am like, very like, that's what I want people to do is make creative decisions and interesting choices that feed the narrative. So someone's like, trying to think of an example of what where someone's come up with an interesting idea to do a terrain.
We've done traps before, like almost improvised traps, either with ropes or nets, or harkening back to talking about the siege at Stonyford, we dug pit traps. And effectively you improvised or applied some trap mechanics into
there's actually rules in here for pits, which I didn't read before. Actually no, maybe I did. I think that's where I got the rules: covered pit and pits and stuff. So yeah, there are rules in the Lore Master's Guide.
Also, let's not beat ourselves up about not knowing every rule. There aren't that many games that require multiple textbooks worth of rule. There's a reason there's a book. We don't need to know all of them all the time.
But
Yeah,
I also think that we didn't. I don't think we suffered from you not knowing that specific rule. But I think it is really important to reward players for interacting with the environment. I think the environment is there to be an inspiration, and if they find ways of using it, great. That's amazing.
And also, I think that's like a good way of running the game, is to make it like you don't have to say to people, like, well, if you take the cover, then it'll be better. You don't want to like put ideas directly to people's heads. But like, as you was it the Josh, you said that Matt Colville says, he says, like, he reward the players for playing the game the way you want them to play it, or something like that.
Yeah, reward them for when they do the things that the game is supposed to be about. So in terms of Adventures Middle-earth, making tactical decisions that people in Tolkien's world might have made, they should be rewarded. So seeking cover, you get a mechanical benefit. You get extra AC if you hide behind that rock.
Yeah, so
I'm definitely up for operant conditioning when it comes to players. Yeah,
yeah, and I think it's also like nice to be like, if people say like, if I do this, what will happen? And all you don't even need to know. You can just say like, there'll be an advantage to that, or there'll be some sort of mechanical benefit. So like, you don't need to explain exactly. You don't need to like peel back the layers and say like, well, if you jump up there, then you'll get +1 to your stealth roll. But like, usually when you're doing checks or rolls, then there may be a DC for checks. So like,
can I just interrupt for the listeners and say that is the voice that Callum does when he's explaining. It's incredibly off-putting.
It's the narrator's voice.
Being open to, just to cut you off briefly there, Callum, being open as the lore master or dungeon master to your players' creativity fosters more of it.
Yeah.
Because if someone says, "Ooh, I'd like to," and you can't be thinking of everything all the time. The players often come up with things you've never thought of. You've not prepped. Mm-hmm. They'll be like, "Actually, could I scale this wall with this?" What I want to do is latch that tree together to make a kind of improvised ladder to climb up the side of this building. You think, I don't know what the rules are going to be for this, but if I don't say no and I either make a quick judgment on the fly or I apply similar rules, I just abstract them onto this, it will encourage them to keep thinking creatively, which means they help you make the encounters more fun, because you can describe the environment and already in their head they're like, oh, well, actually, this is a castle. We could attack the front door, but we know that Callum will reward us if we think intelligently about this. Maybe we can sneak around the back. Maybe there's another gate. Maybe we can set a trap. We can lure them out.
Yeah.
I love describe side to that, if you don't mind. This isn't pulling back the curtain too much, but sometimes when you're playing a game and you're kind of DMing or lore mastering a game, and the players will be prepping for a combat encounter, and they'll be like, right, so the most likely thing is that they're going to try and sneak attack us from behind through this kind of area of terrain. And as a lore master, you go, yeah, that's much better than what I had planned.
Yes,
100%. That is how they're going to do it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, because I'm very keen on using your players' ideas and stealing them if they're better. It's the same with a puzzle. If you design a puzzle and you've got an idea in mind of how to solve it, we need to talk about that at some point separately. But if they come up with a better solution, and you're like, yeah, okay, that was the solution.
That's more fun. So
I would never do that, of course. My puzzles are perfectly planned. Never improvise anything. So I guess that's terrain. Is there anything else to say about terrain?
I was just going to say that one of the other things that is important to think about from a terrain point of view is about the way that interacts with monsters and their monster abilities. The kind of all of these are pieces that kind of click together. I suppose I had in mind thinking about like goblins, and some goblins have that spider climb ability that they can climb up surfaces. So that well-defended, kind of tightly knit, kind of ravines or castles, which would be safe with other monsters, would be a defensive point, suddenly become a much more vulnerable point because the players can't just climb up walls like little spiders.
Yeah, things that you might be like, we're safe here, this isn't, and then you can use the terrain to your advantage. If you ever play Minecraft, then you know that the spiders can climb the walls, so you have to build things with an overhang to stop them getting in there, or have other defenses, like a fence, I guess. Does that work? I can't remember.
Well, you'll have to save it for your Minecraft podcast.
Yeah, Minecraft. They call it a mine.
Craft.
It was worth it just for this.
It's related. Someone made all of Lord of the Rings in Minecraft. I really want to try it.
Right.
So, yes, there's lots of different things. So unstable stalactites, rotten trees that might fall over at any time, rock pillars, terrible stench, the stench of death, freezing pools, webs, windowed walls. There's loads of stuff. And the other place that I take inspiration for rules about terrain is from the Middle-earth strategy battle game, Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yeah.
Warhammer. Like, they've got some really interesting stuff around the mechanics of terrain, and I think that's quite a useful place to like go and get some inspiration from as well.
I'd second that. I really like their terrain rules.
Yeah.
The last piece of terrain, which then leads us a bit into the elements that I wanted to mention, was water and rivers. Rivers are a really good example of terrain you can use because I think it helps that it's something that it's nothing fantastical. It's something that the players already understand, that the water is flowing in a particular direction. It's dangerous to get into the water, and if something falls in, it's likely to be swept in a particular direction. That adds an interesting element to it. I think we've used that to good effect when we did Stony Ford, defending the ford, and we've talked before about the North Ford where we've had multiple battles and the impact of the rapids there. So I think water, running water, the depth of water as well, whether or not characters can swim, is a good example of using the environment and elements to good effect. Weather being the other one, rain, fog, snow. There's plenty that we've encountered. And how does the Lore Master's Guide tackle that?
Just on the point of water, I was just having an idea there that I think that the Hobbit characters should get like disadvantage on swim tests because of all the stuff written about like they're not comfortable in the water unless they're specific. Yeah. Is it Stews? I can't remember which.
Yeah, I feel like it is Stews that
are good on the water, and then I think Men of Laketown gets some. There's a culture.
Yeah, they get specific.
Yeah, and actually, it's come up quite a lot because Halmir, one of the characters, is grown up and been in the sort of in the water all his life and swimming, and it's actually a big part of it. Maybe a big part in the future. So, how does it cover the weather in the Lore Master's Guide? They have a similar section just next to terrain, which is all about weather. Mm-hmm. And they give weather rules for freezing cold, strong gales, thick fog, the warm golden sun. And there's also some atmospheric effects, which I don't think I've ever read before. The incessant buzzing of insects gives disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls until the insects are dealt with.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so for example, some of them, so gale, strong wind, range attacks are made at disadvantage. That makes sense. Freezing cold or torrential downpour or blizzard, that means that creatures without shelter from the weather suffer disadvantage to attack rolls and ability checks, which is pretty broad. Thick fog, you're dealt with having the blinded condition, which I think is again quite harsh. I tend to rule it a bit more leniently. Trying to think of examples of when weather in the books and the film, like weather is a huge part of it, isn't it? Like when there's a mist rolling in, like, and mist and fog can be a force for both good and evil. I'm thinking of like the Barrow Downs.
Big. So I mean, the Barrow Downs. Obviously, the fog there is is kind of an unnatural fog that causes the hobbits to get lost and then end up, rather than traveling out of the Barrow Downs, they're traveling further in until they eventually end up at a barrow.
Whoops.
So that's super magical. And then I'm thinking, like, not in the Lord of the Rings, but when it's the battle of when Errol the Young, who's like the sort of original Rohan, the first person to settle what became known as Rohan, when he rides south to, I think it's Cirion, who's the king of
Cirion is he's the steward at that
was
time.
the steward, and he rides south to meet them, and he wouldn't have made it in time, but the story goes that Galadriel kind of forms as magical mist, and they ride, and they're not sure about it at first. The riders, it's uncertain, but it basically, and it's very abstract in the way that Tolkien does magic, but they manage to arrive in time, and I think the idea is that sort of like helps them along their way and moves them. So it's, I guess, what I like about that is that it's not like fog is evil weather, rain is bad. There's definitely like the sun is good and darkness is bad, but maybe there's a bit more nuance in it sometimes.
Yeah.
Gandalf using the sun to defeat the trolls.
Well, sunlight as environmental effects, light and dark, is a really big part of the mechanical rules. Obviously, you've got things like dark vision, which you can really play with, requiring light sources and the impact of that. And as we talked about, orcs and goblins get disadvantage making attacks in daylight, which is another environmental situation which rewards or punishes the players. So I think players know this, characters know this about orcs, is that they are not good in daylight, and that affects your decision about whether or not you're going to attack, whether you want to stand and fight if it's nighttime. That's another environmental condition which has a clear effect, and I think you could fight the same group of orcs in daytime and nighttime, and it would be a very different battle just because of that one mechanic.
It's always the daytime, nighttime, I think, probably in our campaigns more so than any other weather effect, has been a significant factor all the time. Because I think almost all, mainly orcs, but almost all creatures of the shadow are worse during the day, a little less powerful during the day and more powerful at night. And we talked before about kind of that choosing between two options, both with disadvantages, but there's always that debate of, if it's night, do we find a way to avoid combat until it's day, or if it's day, do we want to force a battle now because it'll be worse if they come on us when it's night? So I think that is a really, really big factor, and really, in terms of it from a kind of player point of view, really, really big in terms of decision making.
I tend to, when I prep battle maps, I try and like make a light and a dark copy of it, or like I'll just apply a filter on Roll20 to the thing to make it darker, because I think that kind of sells it. And I guess part of the nighttime thing that comes into the weather is also decisions you make. It's like, well, do we light a fire? Because some creatures are afraid of the fire. We'll be able to see. Some types of characters may have a degree of dark vision, like dwarves and elves, but it's not quite the same as D&D's dark vision. It's not like you can just see in the dark. It's still really good, but it's not quite as ridiculous. But yeah, that's a common debate, is whether you light a fire or not, and what impacts that will have. And
whether it will mean that other people see you, and suddenly the enemies will know where you are.
Yeah.
We had that in Gundabad a lot, I remember, with torches, whether or not we should take them. And we had this constant debate of, well, it's hard to be stealthy if we're carrying around torches, particularly because the orcs don't really need them. So it'll really draw attention. But then we were like, if we don't have them, they can see better in the dark than we can. So we kind of give up any advantage that we have. So in the end, we decided we would use torches kind of intermittently, and it was always quite tense. And yeah, I think environmental factors giving you extra choice. That's really what it's about, isn't it? It's about layering on more and more choices. You take a normal battle between the party and some orcs. You're like, okay, that can be fun the first time. You're going to fight orcs again. We'll add in some terrain and add in an environmental effect, whether it's day or night, or it's rain, or there's some poisonous bog or something, and suddenly you've got an entirely different combat. And I think just adding in more and more, because there's not really a limit to how many you can layer in. A mixture of terrain and weather and daytime, nighttime. You can have a whole cocktail of battles. And like you say, Callum, ones that if the players have a sense that these are options to fight daytime or nighttime or location, the players can feel that they partly contributed to that sort of state of the combat, state of the battle.
And I wonder if, like, we talk a lot about aim and, like, you know, these sort of things being more important in D&D, but I was just thinking there that maybe there is something about bringing that back into other role-playing games where, like, obviously you have other options, but, like, sometimes, you know, because people are so powerful and there is magic, this isn't in there as much. And then maybe some abilities, so like the ranger, for example, was, you know, famously felt to be less powerful, and with Tasha's Cauldron and everything, the updates, it has become something that's a bit more powerful. But a lot of their mechanics revolve around terrain and travel and so on. And almost if you kind of take the mentality of this and the rules from AIM into D&D, would that become, you know, a big part of their class feature? Because, you know, there are certain, like, I don't know about you when you're playing making characters, but I certainly, like, sometimes I look at ability and I'm like, that's cool, but I don't know if it'll ever come up, or it'll be highly situational if that is ever a factor. Whereas in AIM, I feel like because the focus is much smaller, that most abilities do come up. Occasionally you're like, you know, been playing a character for 5 levels and you're like, oh, I completely forgot about this ability. I can't remember what it was, but recently someone brought that up and I was like, what's that ability? And they're like, I've had it since like level 2 and I forgot about it. So yeah, read your character sheet, I guess.
So what have we learned then? We've learned that because it's a low magic setting, that we want to give the players as much to play with in the world as possible. I guess that's what it comes down to, really, isn't it? You want to make sure there are many different variables as possible to mix it up so that it keeps things different for them, and that you're constantly kind of giving them choices. And the Lore Master's Guide, if you're lucky enough to get hold of it, does have a good selection of weather, of terrain, and of traps. And if you can't get hold of it, because the books are hard now, the Dungeon Master's Guide is very good for traps from 5th edition. And there's a whole host of material online for weather conditions. And actually importing stuff from other games, like you say, often tabletop games, war games have good weather conditions that you can just port in. So do it. Don't be afraid to throw stuff at the players, I think.
Yeah, you can improvise things. Like we've done that with like ice conditions and snow, you know, make a dex check. If you fail the dex check, you fall over. Like it's sort of just, you can just abstract from what happens in real life, isn't it? So you don't need to be constrained. It's great to have rules for inspiration, but don't feel constrained by them. You don't need to have the rules necessarily to introduce weather and terrain into your setting.
I think just to say that, I think that that weather and terrain and these kind of additional elements to combat really add a huge amount of depth to the way that it feels, that it makes it feel more like a world, you know, that you know that there's that wherever you go, that the things will be a bit different, that there'll be kind of different things. Terrain slightly constrains you, but it also means that every place that you fight feels like a place. It feels unique. It feels like there's something about it that makes it different from everywhere else in the world.
No emails except on party business. And comment suggestions and questions to thefellowshipphase@gmail.com. The long year turns to its close. Much we have accomplished these last seasons. Our fellowship disbands, but is not broken, and we will return
on the next episode of The Fellowship Phase.